Welcome back. We've got a fantastic panel for you this morning. We are going to be looking at hydrogen's role in decarbonising buildings. Obviously, this is something that's been sort of touched on a couple of times through the sort of conference so far already. It's always a really interesting conversation, this one. I think, we know that net zero is absolutely essential. We know that also net zero is not that easy to deliver. And domestic heat buildings is probably one of the hardest areas to decarbonise. And so it's always interesting and great to have these conversations around how on earth are we going to pull this one off. So we're going to talk today about the sort of role of hydrogen as part of that sort of wider picture on how we're going to decarbonise buildings. And we've got a fantastic set of panellists who've got a lot of expertise in this area, we're going to sort of have a chat about that this morning. So I'm just going to start off by asking them to introduce themselves, a little bit about what their organisation is doing in this space, and sort of how they're sort of contributing to the sort of hydrogen in the sort of net zero picture. And we'll start with Carl.
Hi everyone, my name's Arntzen. I'm Chief Exec at Worcester Bosch, who are manufacturers of heating equipment. So we manufacture gas boilers, oil boilers, heat pumps, hybrids, and been doing a lot of early research work on hydrogen boilers.
Amazing. Matt.
Yeah, Matthew Lay, I'm UNISON's National Officer for the energy sector. It's the UK's largest trade union, and I look after lots of our workers who are in the gas industry at a technical, professional, white-collar level. And we've been engaging in the hydrogen debate for a number of years, promoting that and supporting it.
Amazing. And finally, James.
Good morning, everyone. My name is James Earl. I'm Director of Gas at the Energy Networks Association. We're the trade association which represents the regulated electricity and gas networks in the UK and some in Ireland as well. In my role, I lead all of our work on gas and on hydrogen, and that includes our flagship Gas Goes Green programme, which is the programme that's coordinating all of the efforts amongst the gas networks to move us towards a decarbonised gas grid in the future.
Amazing. Well, I think when we talk about heat, what we often see, particularly in sort of the media and the public discourse, is this very sort of polarised debate. I mean, the way that it's often set up is it's either 100% heat pumps or it's lots and lots of hydrogen, and you either love hydrogen or you hate hydrogen, and it all sort of, we had this very sort of polarised picture. But it's amazing, we've actually got sort of three people sitting here for whom you've all got sort of almost like a agnosticism there. Carl, you're developing boilers and heat pumps. Matt, you're looking at the decarbonisation piece as a whole. And again, James, you guys are looking at the electricity grid and the gas network. I wonder whether anyone could speak to a little bit about how we get away from this polarised view and to start to talk about a little bit more sensibly around the role for all of these technologies.
Certainly every time I get invited to participate in discussions like this, I emphasise we see the future as a much more diversified energy heating technology landscape than the almost homogeneous solution we've seen up until now with natural gas. And certainly our role is to make available a wide array of different technologies. The UK has got 28 million homes. A lot of those homes are Victorian, Georgian, not very well thermally insulated. And then we've got all of the new build activity and all of the housing stock that's been built over the last 50 years. And therefore, if you're going to decarbonise the complete housing stock, actually having an array of different technologies is necessary. And therefore, from our point of view, we're totally agnostic on it. Our role is to supply all of the technologies available, train and educate the supply chain in which is the most appropriate one. But I think the interesting concept that we're getting into now as well is the vast majority of heating installations in the UK are small, independent, almost sole trader heating engineers working all over the country. And we've got to convert them to become home energy assessors. And that's a huge training role we have as a manufacturer in re-educating that supply chain to make sure the right technology is applied into the right house. Because the last thing we want is the wrong technology in the wrong house, and then we all get disgruntled consumers and unhappy customers.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah, nobody wants that.
Yes, James.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest way we get away from this polarisation is to recognise the time that we have available to actually do this. And to zero in on the actual reason we're doing this, which is net zero by 2050. So we're going to have a decision from government, if we talk about heat, we're going to have a decision in 2026. That gives us pretty much 20 years to actually get there. That is not very long at all. And so we can talk about an idealistic view of the world around a huge amount of heat pumps or a huge amount of hydrogen. But actually, we just need to throw everything at it. We've got to get all technologies up and running. We've got to train a huge amount of different people to do different things. So we need to diversify so that we're not sort of putting all our eggs in one basket in what is a fairly short amount of time.
I think two things. One is building on that point about the scale of change. It's absolutely huge. I'm not sure everybody's totally appreciated that. So we do need to utilise all the technology that we have and all the skills that are currently available in the workforce. But one of the things we also need to do, pick up Carl's point, is we need to also not wait for that decision. We need to be, and we should have been, cracking on with getting homes energy efficient, because whatever technology we deploy in the home, we cannot allow that technology to go on without the levels of energy efficiency, thermal efficiency, not to be addressed. One of my fears has always been in supporting hydrogen and the conversion of the gas grids is that we then push the energy efficiency further along. Because when we engage on the air source heat pump debate, everyone talks about the need to have the high level of thermal efficiency for that to operate. So we need to utilise all technology, but actually simply getting homes energy efficient so that they are well equipped for whatever change comes down the road is a no-brainer, and yet we still haven't really methodically sort of lifted that and pushed it in the way we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, that's often one of the criticisms of hydrogen, isn't it, is that it's used as a reason not to do other things.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely important that that's absolutely not the case. The fact that hydrogen will be part of the solution doesn't mean we don't insulate our homes. It doesn't mean that if you can put a heat pump in your home that you don't do it. So it's absolutely imperative that we have this holistic view, and action is hugely important.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about, you both mentioned the sort of 2026 decision. Obviously, I'd personally like a little bit more clarity around what exactly that 2026 decision will look like. But we've got 3 years before that happens. What do we need to do as an industry to make sure that the government has the information that it needs to make the right decision at that point?
So I think we're starting with trials. We've got some great trials that are in the works. We've got SGN's neighbourhood trial in Fife, which is around sort of, I think, getting near 300 customers up there to start really testing hydrogen in reality in homes. We've got 2 brilliant village trial locations, one in Whitby in the northwest and the other in Redcar in the northeast, which would be a slightly bigger project in terms of connections, around 2,000 connections. There have been lots of controversy around these projects, obviously, but it's really critical that we get them underway, that we get particularly the neighbourhood one underway so we can really start to see how hydrogen works in reality and how consumers engage with it. And we get a decision on which of those villages will go ahead, because the sooner we can really get hydrogen actually into real life homes and see how consumers respond, the easier it will be to make a decision about where and when and how it will be used.
I mean, just on the trials, I mean, we've argued that both villages should be going ahead. Why only one? And I think the most important thing actually for us, and I think for the industry, is that 2026 decision takes place in 2026, and we don't prevaricate and continue to prevaricate, because the point around 2050, next year is 2024, then it's 25 years. It just isn't enough time. And it's great having these long targets in the long distance, but when you look at this, how long it takes this country to deliver big infrastructure projects, and the scale of change, and whether you look at HS2 or Hinkley Point C. You have to allow tolerance for delays and for things not happening to schedule and shocks, etc. We're not going to get there. So it's really important we do put pressure on to make sure decisions are taken when they say they're going to be taken.
I've got a slightly perverse view on timing because we've been on the journey of researching hydrogen since about 2015. So in many respects, we're 8 years in. It began as a submarine project. And some of the teams, a couple of the guys are here today. Tom Collins is here. So a lot of the early research we've been doing over the last 5 years, and then over the last 8 years, I mean. And then the government-funded program officially for us to look at the feasibility of burning 100% hydrogen in a boiler of the same dimensions and physical footprint as a natural gas one. So we're slightly getting frustrated actually now by the whole timing thing because we've done our work. We're as confident as we can be. I get the networks have got to do all of their testing and make sure they're as comfortable as they can be. But yeah, we're sort of chomping at the bit a little bit. Nevertheless, moving forward, we've got to get all of the trials right. We've got to make sure, and everyone needs to buy in that this is a feasible, reliable, safe, and robust solution, and then we can move forward quickly.
Just to add one last point, sorry. Everything we've just talked about there has been about hydrogen. But that 2026 decision is not just about hydrogen, it is about heat. So while we can do all we can to prepare the trials, which, as I said, really are about hydrogen, and consumer response to that, we need to also give government as an industry, not just the people in this room, but as an energy industry, the right information about heat decarbonisation more generally. So about hydrogen, about electrification of heat, about heat networks and other sources as well. I think the worst scenario is that we get to 2026, government perhaps is a bit lukewarm on hydrogen, but doesn't have any of the evidence to inform what they would do if they didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that point as well, because we were just talking about the political dimension, and it goes back to the point around sticking to the timetable around decision making, and some of that is about taking a political risk, we've become wary about making and taking political risks in this country that are unpopular or lead to criticism, and I think the evidence base is really, really important. The technology is really, really important. But at some point, you've got to make some decision, and it may be controversial, and you have to accept it may be controversial. But that's important to get to the end game to achieve that. I doubt we're going to get to net zero without some unpopular measures and some controversy happening. Otherwise, we're not. Again, we're setting ourselves up to fail.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of engagement on the trials has been a bit of a sort of wake-up call for everyone, I think, in terms of where the public is at in terms of its understanding, its willingness, its appetite for change in the home.
Yeah.
I don't know whether anyone could speak to some of the lessons that we've learned around how we engage consumers and in the fact that something's going to have to change.
Well, just coming on one point, we just had our national conference, and before, in the lead to that conference, we did a poll of a sample of our members who are homeowners. So they're going to be purchasing or making decisions around changing heating systems, and it threw up some really interesting answers. I mean, our members work predominantly in the public services. They're, middle income, low income householders. What we got back, the feedback we got was that 75% of respondees were very enthusiastic about doing something and being part of that journey to decarbonise. But what their main concern, their main fear, is one of cost.
Yep.
We are in a cost of living crisis, and the challenge of doing anything. So a government might make decisions in 2026, but actually what we need to do is make sure whatever options are taken are affordable, and that the range of incentives are meaningful in ways that we don't think, say for instance, the incentive to move to a heat pump is, because it requires people to have upfront cash. So in terms of appetite, we're certainly convinced that there is great appetite for people, but in terms of being able to do something about it and it being easy and applicable, cost is going to be absolutely at the forefront of people's concerns.
You mentioned the word incentives, Matt. I think there's a huge amount of behavioural economics in this whole thing, in that in the trial area, I think what we've learned is that they're not particularly against hydrogen necessarily, and a lot of people are quite interested in net zero and want to play their part. But when it comes to actually making changes to their home, particularly if there's any feeling that they're compelled to do so, and this won't just be heating, it will be in other areas as well, in transport, in food potentially as well. If there's that feeling of compulsion with nothing in it for them, consumers won't want to do it. So we've got to reframe the narrative so that the incentives are right, so that these new solutions feel exciting and that consumers feel that there's really something in it for them personally as well.
This is a strange journey for me because I've been with the Worcester Bosch business for 30 years, and up until now, consumers have found boilers really boring. Nobody ever wants to talk about their heating until the day the boiler goes wrong, and they want it either then fixed really quickly or replaced. And actually now having this huge debate about heating and getting consumers engaged in the discussion, and it's slightly bizarre. But I mean, from our perspective, really, this is that critical decision point on a long journey, and we've got to help consumers understand what options they've got, what's the best situation moving forward, and as I said, probably a much more diversified solution than with the historical, almost homogenous one that we've had. So it's really interesting times, and people are wanting to talk to me about boilers. It's so exciting.
Who knew you'd live to see the day when people talked about boilers around the dinner table?
Yeah, amazing.
The one thing is people won't want to be cold.
No, that's true.
And people won't want to live. So that's got to go, whatever solution we have. But one of the interesting things is you don't get a better type of heat. It's not like changing from a cassette to a CD. That sort of technology change that was there. It was commercially driven because people were getting something they felt was better, a higher quality product. The reality is with heat, you're either warm or you're cold. And that, coming back to your point around how do we tap into how people's behaviour and where people are going to go. This is why it comes back to me and to our union is around affordability and making good choices that people believe are both helping the environment but actually are going to make them comfortable in their home. That's really, really important.
Yeah. So on that point around sort of cost and affordability, obviously when we're talking about domestic heat, there's sort of three components to that, isn't there? There's the cost of the appliance, there's the cost of whatever it is that you're putting into that, whether it's electricity or whether it's hydrogen, and then there's the cost of the system that sits behind that. And it's perhaps that third one that often gets overlooked around the cost of the system. And I don't know whether perhaps, James, is sort of your area, whether you could talk a little bit to the sort of cost of the system and where hydrogen can sort of play in that area.
Yeah, I'll pull out a couple of things from pieces of work we've done in the past. So we've done a piece of work that really kicked off our Gas Goes Green programme originally, which showed that by 2050 we could save £13 billion a year by having a mixed system with hydrogen and electricity in it. It's not specifically heat, this is a wider system. But these figures are really, really big. That's really, really important. But it is very difficult to get that figure to feed through down to someone putting a hydrogen boiler in or putting a heat pump in. So in some way, we've got to find a way to take quite intricate, often quite academic reports and studies into something that actually engages the end consumer. We did another really interesting piece of work a couple of years ago called A System for All Seasons, and this was outlining what a system would need to look like to manage energy demand at any time of year in 2050. And that showed if we don't have hydrogen in the mix at all, anywhere, and we try and electrify everything, we could need over 1,000 gigawatts of renewable power to manage that specific moment in winter where it's really, really cold and the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining as well. So from a system perspective, you look at these sorts of numbers and figures and you think, okay, we've got to have a diversified energy mix here. But the next question, which is the most difficult question, is how to actually make that work for the end consumer.
Yeah, and I almost a question I was going to ask you from I think moving forward, when you talk about smart energy systems as well, we've got to move in this country towards a situation where rather than having a gas network over here and an electricity network over there, we need to have an integrated energy system. And actually one of the things we can do as well as a heating appliance manufacturer is provide that ability to talk two ways with these networks. And which is why we're doing a lot of research around hybrid technology, which is a heat pump working in conjunction with a boiler of some description, and that can be a hydrogen boiler in the future. But actually you're communicating with that appliance, and if the wind hasn't been blowing or the sun hasn't been shining and the capacity of electricity is down a little bit, switch it over to gas operation in the peak periods during winter or vice versa. And we have the ability to develop that type technology, interact with the networks in a smart way, and deal with this as an integrated energy system, no longer a gas system and an electricity one.
That's where we need our future system operator to step up to the plate, don't
Correct.
I think just considering the huge scale of that level of renewable power that would be required, and you consider that right now there's a huge amount of planned offshore wind, but it can't be delivered. There's a huge waiting list of approvals and getting and the ability to connect offshore wind onto the grid. This is going to potentially hold back the scale and speed in which we can bring onshore wind. But if we can get more onshore wind, of course, we can produce a lot more green hydrogen, because, if we are expanding onshore wind for peak electricity demand, there isn't going to be peak electricity demand all the time, and far from it, actually. A lot of wind at night when there isn't. So you can utilise that for hydrogen production. But just also thinking through, again, not sort of negative about this, but it does require some mandation and some requirement to move things forward. And we talk about taking unpopular decisions and having smart systems. We've not even been able to get a smart meter standard correct and get them installed in people's homes. Yeah, we've been doing this for a number of years, and we are a long way short of achieving that, and we're in the process of replacing meters, and it's not a very good advertisement for doing the sorts of things that actually are needed in a way which is consumer friendly. And of course, one of the biggest blockers right now to smart meters is consumer resistance, based on a little bit of myth and a little bit of sort of playing around with news stories. So we need to learn some lessons from that as we move forward, and not repeat those mistakes.
Yeah. I forgot to say at the beginning, if you haven't sort of fired up your app, then please do so. We'll be sort of taking questions from the screen. So if you've got a question you want to ask the panelist, pop it on the app. Otherwise, we'll also come around with the roaming mic as well. But before we do that, I just want to talk very briefly about skills. Net zero as a whole is a huge infrastructure challenge. Hydrogen's going to create an awful lot of jobs, but similarly, it's going to need an awful lot of skills. Where are we up to with that? Do we have the skills in the UK? Is there more that we need to be doing there to get ready for hydrogen?
I mentioned earlier on the role of the heating installer in the home being a home energy assessor. So there's a big educational training piece of work to be done there. But it's not rocket science. It's not as though we're teaching them things that they don't already know. It's actually reminding them when they were at college 20 years ago, you need to do a heat loss calculation. You need to assess the whole building in front of you. We've unfortunately got into the habit in a lot of cases of a lot of boilers are replaced as an emergency measure during the winter. They go in, oh yes, I can take that boiler off and put another one in its place. They don't really look at what's going on elsewhere in the system. But educating on that, as I say, is not rocket science, because they know all of that. They know how to do it. We just need to remind them how to do it. So it's an upskilling of the existing workforce into skills that they learned 20, 30 years ago at college. Yeah. And upskilling them to be this home energy assessor, I think, is an important skills element and we have the ability, as do all the other heating manufacturers, to deliver that.
I think if you were to ask me what the biggest obstacle to getting to net zero by 2050 is having a skilled, capable workforce in place. It's worth bearing in mind that a third of the workforce in the gas industry is over 50 and is approaching retirement. The question marks around the future of the gas industry that have been around for quite some period of time have led to inaction. We haven't recruited enough people. A lot of the small suppliers came through very traditional routes of training and development, often in yesteryear through the sort of British gas pathways, and it's the same in the demographics are very similar in the electricity industry as well. We're faced with an ageing workforce, and yes, we are bringing new people on, but not at the rate of knots that we know we need to get to drive the sort of programs necessary for net zero. And of course, we might be doing these programs simultaneously at the same time. So, if we're doing energy efficiency and we're decarbonising the home with smart grid, air source heat pumps and hydrogen boilers and decarbonising the industrial sector. All of that, I think National Grid estimated some 400,000 new jobs would be created. That's a lot of people in a world where right now everyone's experiencing labour shortages and people are not choosing necessarily to come into the energy industry as a career of choice. So there's a lot of work to be done in that, and we can make all the decisions we want around future technology, and we can lobby for the resources and the money to do that. What we cannot forget is that we need workers to deliver those programs, and those workers need to be motivated and looked after and trained and skilled to do those jobs and respected for the work they do, which is essentially keeping people warm and the lights on. And I think it's really, really important.
Amazing.
I couldn't agree more, and we've got a huge challenge across the whole energy industry to get people upskilled, but it does worry me particularly in the gas industry, because if you're young and you're in education and you care about all things net zero and you want to build a career around it, right now you're probably going to be looking at renewable electricity. That's probably going to be where you're going to be focusing your attention, because at that age and with that level of experience, you're not going to understand the nuances of the role that hydrogen will play as well. But I think we as an industry need to take some collective responsibility for that. I would like to think everyone in this room is an advocate of hydrogen's role in the energy system, so we need to advocate that with our networks and the people that we speak to try and get that passion for all things hydrogen feeding up through the younger generations.
Make sure they know hydrogen's cool, right?
Absolutely.
Great. And in terms of what you guys would like to see from government, obviously there's been a lot of progress that has been made over the last few years. What do we need to see now from government to make hydrogen a reality in this space?
A decision.
Simple as that?
Simple as that. Get off the fence and let's take a decision to move forward.
On hydrogen-ready boilers, perhaps, or
just in general, the role of hydrogen within the economy. I mean, we've been talking about it, as I've said, for quite some time now. And actually, as usual, I think there's a real opportunity for us to take a lead in Europe as the UK. But our politicians are not renowned for brave, speedy decisions. So we keep pushing them and pushing them and pushing them. But for me, as I've said, we've done all of our work almost from our perspective. And I know there's lots of other projects and other work to be done, but conceptually it's feasible. So give us a decision and then we'll make the necessary investment.
I think there has to be belief that the decisions that are taken are not going to change in the next 2 years after. So that's for me is about credibility and about consistency. We've been bedeviled really in the past decade with sort of changes which have been incredibly harmful, I think, to the confidence to take some of the bigger decisions that are needed to transform the industry, and that has undermined it. So it isn't just about making a decision. It's got to be credible. There's got to be confidence that that decision isn't going to change, at a whim, and people can get behind it. And if possible, we need to try and build some consensus around those decisions, because we don't have the luxury of 4 years later changing it again, because you just can't do that and expect to get to your end game of decarbonising the economy.
So 3 things from me when it comes to heat and what we need from government. Yeah, we absolutely need a decision. I think in the nearer term, what we need is a pathway to make that decision. At the moment, we in the industry are working towards a decision in 2026. We need to know what are the parameters of that decision, how will it weigh up that whole energy system question about the roles of different technologies as well in that decision. The industry is somewhat in the dark around how that decision will be made. So we need some clarity on that pathway. Number 2, I think we need more ambition on hydrogen production, because if we're talking about heat, I think it's about 720 terawatt hours of gas goes into heat at the moment. That is just light years away from the 250 megawatts announced in the electrolytic allocation round, which is great. It's a good start, but I do worry that we've been quite excited about 5 gigawatts by 2030, going up to 10 gigawatts by 2030, but we need more pace and we need more ambition, I think, if hydrogen for heat is going to have a really big role to play. And then lastly, on the consumer side as well, I think we need government to really step into that space of how we really engage consumers in all of this. There's been a little bit of a vacuum which the private sector have had to fill at trying to get consumers engaged. And I think if I was a consumer who wasn't in my job, if I was a consumer who had nothing to do with the energy industry, I would be very confused at the moment, and I wouldn't know really which way to turn when it comes to heat decarbonisation. And so we need that direction from government, really.
And do you think that's a role for central government or local government? Where's the sort of the balance there around the trusted voice for the consumer? Who should be coordinating that messaging to consumers around heat?
I don't think it's definitely not all central government. There's a role that central government has to play, but I think that question of trust, I think realistically it's going to have to be local government that push it a lot more than central government, but that doesn't mean to say that central government don't have a role to play as well.
I think the challenge with local government, having an expectation, they've got so many challenges. They have got so many challenges already. The idea of giving them that sort of extra burden. The reality is we've got to go back a little bit in time and look at how we've done things successfully in the past. I'm not advocating necessarily. You follow the course when we converted the gas grids from town gas to methane. But when you look at that programme, there was a massive amount of public education and reassurance. They used to have booking vans going around showing people that you could, it boiled the water in the same way as, town gas and methane. But the reality is, you're right, people, I'm not sure that they're necessarily phased about the technology. Because I think they will assume the technology is safe. Otherwise, what's the point of living in a country that would not do that? But I think they are bothered about making purchasing decisions that are good and sound. Again, it comes back to the cost of living issue, and that those decisions are going to be supported by technology and by what else is there. They're not going to be left alone and just left high and dry. And I think it's really important that they are assured of that.
Amazing. Well, we haven't got any questions on the screen yet, but I wonder whether we've got any in the room. If you just whack your hand up. Yes, we've got one here from Chris.
Thank you. Go on, Chris Manson-Whitten. I thought I'd got it on the screen. I've clearly not got the tech right. I know we talk about a big decision. I'm going to be honest, I think there are some stepwise things we can do in the meantime, and how do we unleash them. So one, I think let's get volume up by industrial decarbonisation that produces volume. There is blending, and we talked about some of the issues to do with consumers and trials. One of the joys of blending is you unhook a change in a property from a decision or from an acceptance of hydrogen. So our 650 homes under high deploy in Winlaton, nobody noticed. it just carried on. So I think role for blending and then the role for H2 ready boilers. I guess question for the panel, what are the things on those three areas government could do to unleash the option of hydrogen for heat, even if it isn't a decision?
I think all three areas, it's the same answer. It's just pace and decisions quickly. So blending, we're expecting a policy decision this year. Let's get it as early as we can this year. I know, Chris, you've been pushing that just as much as I have. Hydrogen-ready boilers, again, we've had a consultation on that. We need the direction post-consultation. And the first question around volumes and pushing them into industry, I think, speaks to the point that I made, that we've got a 10 gigawatt target, and I think most of that is going to be directed at industry. Let's get on with it. And is that actually enough? We've got a huge amount of industrial demand out there, just waiting for hydrogen to come. So let's be more ambitious and do it quicker as well.
I think on, well, two things. On solar, we also know there's a huge amount of customer appetite for solar. It's a relatively well understood technology. I mean, the bit about then utilising that for electrolysis, I mean, that may not be necessarily the best thing, I don't know, but the reality is we could get more solar on roofs, we would, and battery storage, we would reduce demand on the grid, and that would be a big way forward. I think the big advantage that hydrogen has over other technologies for the consumer is the ability to have a hydrogen-ready boiler, and that conversion is then much simpler. And I think for the consumer, and going back to the conversation we've been having, that is a really attractive proposition if you can deliver the hydrogen to the home, and I think that's a really big thing.
Easy answers from my point of view. We've done all the research, we've done all the development work. 20% blend of hydrogen into the gas network, we've confirmed, doesn't impact existing appliances. It's a no regrets decision as far as I can see, just get on with it. And then in terms of hydrogen ready, similar sort of answer. From our perspective, we've done a lot of the development work. The team here today have done a lot of that development work to say, yeah, a hydrogen boiler is this. We've committed, as all of the other boiler manufacturers have, that if they mandate hydrogen-ready boilers, when we get to scale, they'll be the same price, same cost as an existing natural gas boiler. And again, it's a no-regrets decision, because if hydrogen never comes, those boilers just run on natural gas forever. So why not take that decision? And again, it's just, you can probably gather the frustration in my voice that very often I think, governments are risk averse, aren't they? And they have to be careful of taking the wrong decisions. But there's two really easy decisions, no regrets decisions that they could move forward with right now.
Well, there we go. What a great note to finish on. We're ready to go. Let's just get on and do it, right, Carl?
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, if you'd like to join me in thanking our panelists today.